Welcome to Paskvan Podcasts. If you like, subscribe, and comment, it really helps this channel. Today, we are stepping into a case that is, well, it's just relentlessly controversial, but it's also one of the most documented cases of its kind. We're turning our attention to a house on Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana.
Just a seemingly ordinary two-story brick building.
Exactly. But this place became the center of events that were so extreme, they forced seasoned police officers, skeptical ER doctors, even conservative Catholic clergy to file reports that just defied any rational explanation.
And that's really our starting point, isn't it? This wasn't just folklore.
Wow.
When you look at this stack of sources we have, and we're talking official police records, detailed hospital notes, records from Child Protective Services, even documentation of sanctioned church involvement, our goal isn't just to retell a spooky story.
Right.
It's to try and understand the competing explanations for what happened when reality seemed to just break down inside that house. The true anomaly for you listening to this is the sheer weight of all that institutional paperwork.
That's where it gets so compelling. We have to sort through these horrifying claims from the Emmons family. And some of them sound, genuinely impossible, like something from a movie.
Yeah, completely unbelievable on their own.
But then you have to weigh that against what impartial professional observers, people with absolutely no stake in the outcome, actually saw and logged officially.
So the question becomes, why did this one house generate a paper trail that elevates it so far above just, a typical haunting claim?
And why, years later, is the truth still suspended perfectly between firm belief and unwavering doubt? Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do.
To really get a handle on the fear that took root on Carolina Street, I think we have to start with the place itself, the geography, the social landscape of Gary, Indiana.
That contextual setup is absolutely vital. Our sources describe Gary as a city that was already burdened, emotionally, economically, you name it.
It was a former powerhouse, right? A steel town.
A booming steel town. But by this point, decades of industrial decline had just hollowed it out. You had entire blocks of abandoned homes, decaying buildings, shuttered businesses.
So the environment itself kind of suggested decay and loss.
A kind of palpable societal grief, yeah. The silence in some of those neighborhoods was heavy. It made the atmosphere feel receptive to, and maybe even amplify, stories of misfortune.
Distress gets compounded by the landscape.
Exactly.
And into this quiet, burdened city in the early 2010s, LaToya Ammons moves with her family.
She's a single mother just looking for some stability, and she chooses this modest, aging brick home on Carolina Street.
It was unremarkable, affordable, solid, the little front porch. It was supposed to be a fresh start.
The best of limited options in a city that was, full of forgotten homes. And while there were some local whispers about previous tenants leaving suddenly, nothing concrete really prepared them for what was about to happen.
The sources say the first few weeks were pretty routine, just the expected creaks and groans of an old house. But then within weeks, the subtle disturbances began. And it started with something biological and bizarre.
The flies.
The flies.
Yeah.
Black flies gathering near the front porch.
It wasn't just that there were flies, though. It was the timing and their behavior that made the family and later professionals really stop and take notice.
Because it was deep winter.
Deep winter. Temperatures were low, freezing even. The kind of cold that should have kept insects dormant.
But instead, you have these thick clouds, these swarms, collecting at the doorway, buzzing against the window.
They're falling all over the porch rail. It makes no sense.
So this is where that initial anomaly starts to resist any kind of basic rationalization. LaToya tried to handle it, of course. She assumed, maybe a dead animal somewhere in the walls.
The logical explanation. So she called exterminators multiple times. But the sources all note the exterminators were completely baffled.
They couldn't find anything.
They did thorough inspections. No nests, no dead animals. There was no logical reason for these flies to be behaving this way. A thick, persistent swarm in the middle of winter.
And appearing inside sealed rooms.
Exactly. The exterminators confirmed the phenomenon was real, but they had no causal agent to report. They were stumped.
So when this biological nuisance wouldn't leave, the auditory intrusion began.
Which is a classic escalation in these types of claims.
Yeah. Late at night, when the house should have been still, there were these heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing through the halls, moving from room to room.
And LaToya would check, right?
She'd check, but the children were always in their beds, accounted for. The source of the sound was never where she was looking.
And the sounds quickly went beyond just the typical, settling noises of an old house.
Oh, yeah. Doors would slam with great force without warning. Cabinets banged shut.
And the sources note these sharp, forceful knocking sounds coming directly from inside the structure, from the walls and the ceilings.
That's the detail that gets me. They were described as sounds that seemed to be demanding entry from inside the structure itself.
That implication that the source is already internal, that it's active, that is a profoundly destabilizing idea for anyone trying to hold on to their sanity.
That cumulative noise that led directly to LaToya's growing unease. And it started manifesting physically.
She started feeling intensely watched, like a physical certainty that made her skin prickle.
Yeah, and the air inside the house felt heavy, almost oppressive. She said it required a conscious effort just to breathe in certain rooms.
And then the unexplained cold spots would hit the family members, vanishing as quickly as they appeared.
You connect this to the bigger picture, and the sources all point to one area in particular that radiated this deep discomfort.
The basement.
The basement. It's this accumulation of small disruptive details that just starts to wear a family down, breaking their grasp on what's real.
These small, continuous disruptions, things like children's toys or kitchen pots vanishing and then reappearing in strange, conspicuous places.
Doors that were securely closed one moment would be found wide open the next.
It forces the family to constantly question their own memory, their own sense of control over their environment.
So we have this city in decline, a normal family just trying to find some stability, and a house where the laws of basic entomology and physics are already starting to bend. What happens when that disruption moves from just being a subtle annoyance to, well, to direct, targeted action?
The transition from that subtle activity to direct hostility, it focuses almost entirely on the children.
Okay.
The source documents make it really clear that the children were the first ones to openly show extreme fear, and the activity began targeting them specifically. That just raises the stakes dramatically for LaToya.
They were reporting dark shapes and shadows, but these weren't just, fleeting glimpses out of the corner of your eye.
No. They described solid, tall, featureless silhouettes, standing in corners near the staircase, or often right at the foot of their beds, just watching, silently.
And what makes these accounts stand out, and it's something that was noted in later interviews, is this one detail.
That the figures didn't just disappear when the lights were turned on.
Right. The children said they would retreat slowly, that they appeared to melt back into the walls or the door frames.
Which suggests an interaction with the environment that's more structural than just a trick of the light.
They also spoke of voices calling their names. Whispers coming from empty spaces. It got to the point where they refused to sleep alone.
And this hostility wasn't just confined to the family. The atmosphere got so thick that visitors noticed it immediately.
Friends and relatives who tried to stay and help would leave quickly.
And they'd report these severe headaches, profound nausea, or just an overwhelming sense of dread that would vanish the second they stepped back outside onto the sidewalk.
It's like the house possessed a type of emotional contagion, drawing people into its negative energy field.
Indeed. The family members themselves complained of intense, sudden physical discomfort headaches, nausea, dizziness that would disappear instantly upon stepping outside. The sources suggest a direct physical effect of the interior environment on the human body.
And the emotional climate inside the home reflected all this chaos.
Oh, absolutely. Tempers flared over trivial things. The stress level was perpetually high. It suggests the house was amplifying negative emotions, maybe even feeding on the fear it was generating.
The sounds also got worse. They went from random slamming to hostile, deliberate sounds.
The children started hearing these low, guttural murmurs they couldn't decipher. But then, on several documented occasions, deep, raspy growls echoed up from the basement.
A sound that was distinctly non-human.
And that immediately confirmed for the family that this was not just suggestion or stress.
This is a critical progression because when whatever this is begins to physically interact, the case moves out of the subjective realm and into the domain of objective, observable evidence.
That's right. LaToya started documenting unexplained physical injuries.
Dark fingerprints along the children's arms, marks on their legs and backs that couldn't be explained by falls or accidents.
And the children were insistent. They said they had been grabbed, pushed, or held down by something they couldn't see.
LaToya herself reportedly woke up one morning with unexplained scratch marks on her arm and her back.
The scratches and bruises were disturbing enough to bring in Child Protective Services, but the case shifted from custody concern to one of pure shock when the family started reporting phenomena that demanded an official witness.
Even if that account defied every known law of physics.
The children were telling these truly awful stories about being pulled at, feeling immense pressure, and then the unthinkable claims began.
These are the claims that sound the most unbelievable. They're the ones that skeptics leverage the most, yet they are absolutely central to the institutional documentation that we have.
Right. LaToya reported behavior that was physically impossible. The claim of her son walking backward up the living room wall.
Upright, his feet pressed against the wall, his eyes rolled back and vacant.
That one is cited again and again across multiple accounts, and witnesses said he just dropped back down afterwards, seemingly confused about what had just happened.
Okay, I have to stop you there. This is the moment. This is where any rational person calls this sensationalism, or maybe even a manufactured lie, to mask domestic issues.
Of course.
Claims of wall walking and levitation. I mean, it sounds like B-movie special effects. So how did the impartial professionals, the doctors, the police, how do they address claims that are so far outside the boundary of accepted reality?
And that tension is the narrative engine of this entire case. Professionals are trained to operate within known parameters. They're taught to eliminate the impossible. What stands out in the documentation is that the professionals couldn't eliminate the reports because they started witnessing related phenomena themselves. But to directly address your point, there was a second equally outrageous claim.
Another child.
Another child allegedly rose several inches off the mattress while asleep, hovering silently before slamming back down with great force onto the bed.
If these were just isolated claims, they would be immediately dismissed as fantasy or psychosis. But they were happening inside an environment that was already documented to be plagued by persistent, inexplicable phenomena witnessed by dozens of people.
And that paves the way for the institutional involvement that sets the Carolina Street case apart. The claims were so outrageous that institutions had to investigate, if only to disprove them.
And that investigation led to a paper trail that confirmed the strangeness, not the fraud.
This next part is really the core of the whole mystery. What gives the Carolina Street events their historical longevity is the sheer volume of independent professional witnesses.
People whose livelihoods depend on verifiable facts.
Exactly. And they documented events they could not explain, regardless of what the cause might have been.
Law enforcement was called repeatedly. And initially they were expecting, domestic disturbances or possibly neglect.
Standard procedure.
But the police reports themselves became the foundation of the legend. Officers' direct, first-hand observations were written into official, legally binding records, not just, anecdotal notes for colleagues.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, just consider the professional risk involved.
A seasoned law enforcement officer putting his reputation on the line.
To document observations that defy physics, logic, and all departmental training. It's immense. The sources confirm a specific event reported by the responding officers. One documented witnessing a child suddenly lift off the ground and flip backward.
And another officer confirmed hearing those deep, rasping, growling sounds while he was alone in a room.
Even though no physical source could be located.
Officers also described observing cold spots that made their breath visible, even though the rest of the house was temperate.
They saw doors slamming forcefully on their own right in front of them.
And these aren't rookie cops. These are professionals recording these impossible observations into official reports. The fact that they risked their credibility by logging these events, it just speaks volumes about the severity of what they actually saw.
And it wasn't just contained to the house. The children were brought to the hospital multiple times for these unexplained physical injuries and acute mental distress.
So doctors did physical exams.
And found no medical explanation for the bruises and scratches. The sources indicate that psychological evaluations were attempted, but they failed to provide any kind of cohesive diagnosis for the extreme erratic behavior being reported.
So why did the psychological evaluations fail? I mean, surely, given the stress of the environment and the family's situation in Gary, trauma or a shared delusion would be the most professionally sound diagnosis.
Well, the difficulty, as it's noted in the hospital charts, was that the symptoms didn't align neatly with any known conditions.
How so?
For example, the behavior was too intermittent and, crucially, too location-dependent to be classic psychosis. It didn't fit the profile for severe PTSD or Munchausen by proxy.
So medical professionals are trained to eliminate possibilities.
Right. And when they couldn't fit this extreme behavior into a known diagnostic category, they were forced to log the events as essentially observation of unknown etiology.
Which basically means they saw it, but the cause was medically untraceable.
Correct. And the observations continued inside the hospital setting, away from the influence of the house itself.
What was documented by the nursing staff? I mean, they're on the front lines.
The nurses' testimonies are arguably the most chilling part of this because they were independent observers in a sterile professional environment. They reported that the children would become intensely hostile without any provocation, often speaking in unfamiliar voices and using complex adult language that was far beyond their normal vocabulary.
Wow.
Staff also noted sudden temperature drops in the rooms, and critical equipment like IV stands would begin shaking with great force, sometimes requiring multiple nurses to hold them steady.
And these are events observed by people with no prior connection to the family, no interest in promoting some sensational narrative.
Not at all.
So the escalation involving physical injury and these extreme behavioral changes, it inevitably led to the involvement of Child Protective Services.
Due to the unexplained danger and the injuries, CPS intervened. They removed the children from the Carolina Street house.
An action which just confirms the severity of the institutional concern. It doesn't matter if they believed in a spiritual entity or a psychological issue. The environment was officially deemed unsafe.
Hazardous to the children's well-being.
And this brings us to the crucial piece of evidence that troubled all the institutional parties involved, the police, the doctors, and the social workers.
The sources all confirm this critical observation. The children's disturbing behavior seemed to improve dramatically, almost instantaneously, once they were physically away from the Carolina Street structure.
See, that's a key point. If this were purely psychological, say a shared delusion, extreme trauma, suggestion, you might expect the symptoms, particularly the anxiety and the non-native speech patterns, to travel with the family.
You would?
The almost immediate reduction in this hostile, erratic behavior once they were separated from the physical building. That's a piece of counter-evidence against the simple psychological explanation.
It suggested the location, the house itself, was the vector, or the source, or the anchor of the activity.
And this improvement, combined with the reports of cold spots and physically impossible movements, it brought in the final institution.
The clergy. Catholic priests responded, starting with blessings and minor exorcisms. Our sources emphasize that the priest reported an overwhelming dread, particularly in the basement and the stairwell.
And they often had physical symptoms too. Intense headaches, profound nausea.
They did.
Can you elaborate on the difference between, a simple blessing and what was happening in this case? The use of terms like minor exorcism and infestation implies a very specific, escalating assessment by the church.
Absolutely. The Catholic Church operates under extremely cautious protocols. A minor exorcism is essentially a prayer of deliverance. It's often used quickly to cleanse a space or an individual of negative influence or temptation. It's part of a routine sacramental life.
Okay.
However, when these minor prayers were performed on the children, their reactions were reportedly intense. Screaming, thrashing, rapid eye movements, and the use of that non-native speech.
So the priests concluded that these reactions were consistent with cases of spiritual oppression, if not full possession.
Right. So the priests moved from simple pastoral care to a formal assessment of a deep spiritual compromise.
And the internal terminology shifted. It went from just describing the house as haunted to categorizing it as an infestation. And in clerical terms, an infestation is a very serious designation. It suggests a spiritual force is actively exerting a pervasive physical influence over a specific location.
Targeting physical objects and people within that structure.
Exactly. It's a step beyond a typical lingering spirit and implies a deeply rooted, highly malevolent power tethered to that site.
And the documentation gathered by all these independent institutions, law enforcement, medical staff, clergy, it forms the bedrock of why this case continues to resist any simple dismissal. It just became a series of documented, cross-referenced anomalies.
The fact that the Catholic Church rarely authorizes formal major exorcisms cannot be overstated. I mean, it is a highly formal, deliberate process designed to rule out all other medical and psychological causes first.
It's the absolute last resort.
So after these comprehensive evaluations and the accumulation of all these disturbing reports from law enforcement, from medical staff, from the clergy, the church took the extraordinary historic step of sanctioning a major exorcism on Latoya Ammons herself.
And that decision signals the church's conclusion that all natural explanations had been exhausted, or at least the spiritual threat was deemed too severe to ignore.
The ritual itself was performed outside the house, in a controlled setting.
which speaks to the professionalism of the process.
LaToya claims she experienced intense physical reactions during it, uncontrollable shaking, an overwhelming sense of cold, a sensation of intense pressure in her chest and throat, as if she were being constrained.
And the clergy documented these responses, noting that they aligned with other rare, studied cases.
All of this fueled the escalating spiritual fear among the clergy. This ongoing belief that the Carolina Street House, specifically the structure and its lower levels, was the nexus of the whole problem.
That's right. The sources note that the clergy believed the house acted as a portal.
A portal.
It was described as a location where something genuinely malevolent could enter the world and influence anyone who stayed too long.
And the basement was consistently cited as the focal point. Priests reported an atmosphere of dread so intense they struggled to even complete prayers or maintain their composure down there.
So this elevated the case from a personal haunting to a site of potential widespread spiritual contamination.
And once word of this institutional response, the police reports, CPS intervention, and now a sanctioned exorcism leaked.
The media coverage just exploded.
Local reporting quickly gave way to national networks. The story was everywhere, with sensational headlines referencing demonic presence and exorcism in Gary, Indiana.
And that modest brick home was photographed and filmed relentlessly. It transformed a private family crisis into a national spectacle.
This is that critical pivot point, isn't it? Where objective reporting meets sensationalism and the narrative just begins to fracture.
Immediately. The rise of skepticism was massive and well-funded. Critics, including psychologists and debunkers, argued vehemently that the children's extreme behavior was a product of severe trauma, psychological contagion, suggestion,
or possible outright fraud.
Right, all amplified by the family's pre-existing religious beliefs and the intense media attention.
So what were the specific points the skeptics used to counter all these official reports?
The core of the skeptical argument really focused on two main areas: lack of video evidence and psychological mechanism. First, they cited the lack of conclusive video to prove levitation, wall walking, or genuine possession.
And without video, the documentation becomes reliant on subjective witness accounts, even if those witnesses are professionals.
Exactly. Second, they argued for the concept of psychological contagion.
Explain that.
They explained that in a high-stress family unit, where the mother genuinely believes a house is afflicted, fear and suggestion can be transmitted rapidly. The children, seeking to please or reflect their mother's distress, would then exhibit somatic or behavioral symptoms that mimic the claimed affliction.
And this is a professionally recognized phenomenon.
It is. So the skeptics had a strong, scientifically grounded counter-argument.
But the believers had an equally strong counter-argument, and it wasn't rooted in faith, but in institutional behavior.
Precisely. The believers stressed the sheer number of independent witnesses who had nothing to gain by lying police officers, nurses, doctors. These were people whose professional training taught them to rely on facts, not fantasy.
And the fact that Child Protective Services intervened and removed the children based on unexplained danger provided official government weight to the severity of the situation.
So the case fractured into these two rigid, competing narratives, and neither one could fully explain all the data points.
And into that fracture stepped the prominent paranormal investigator, Zach Bagans.
He approached the house not as a witness, but as a purchaser. He bought the property, determined to document the darkness and ensure the story and the alleged energy wasn't forgotten.
And his claims during his investigation, they mirrored the original events.
Which suggests either intense suggestion or a continuation of the phenomena. He claimed his crew members experienced intense emotional instability, illness, paranoia, deep depression while working inside the structure.
He also alleged that artifacts removed from the house carried a negative influence, triggering panic attacks and aggressive behavior in people who came into contact with them.
Suggesting that the house's influence was not stationary.
And we also have the technical observations from his team.
Technical failures plagued the filming. Sources claim cameras would shut off unexpectedly, audio equipment suffered constant distortion, batteries drained instantly, all anecdotal, but presented as evidence of an energy field that was resisting objective documentation.
Bagans himself later admitted the house affected him profoundly, claiming he struggled with intense dark thoughts long after his visits.
Of course, critics immediately dismiss these claims as performance, required by his career. But his final act was far more permanent and consequential.
In 2016, he made a decision that ended the physical life of the controversy.
He leveled the house.
The Carolina Street House simply ceased to exist. It's just an empty lot of dirt and rubble now.
And his stated reason for the demolition was that destroying the structure was the safest ethical option to prevent the alleged lingering corrosive energy from affecting future unsuspecting occupants.
An action which created yet another layer of controversy. Skeptics saw it as an admission that there was nothing physical worth preserving or studying.
Their argument was, if real evidence existed, it would have been documented, not destroyed.
Believers, on the other hand, viewed it as a necessary containment measure, preventing a dangerous spiritual locus from remaining accessible.
In either case, the decision erased the physical evidence forever, making the entire mystery dependent solely on the paper trail left behind.
So the demolition wasn't the conclusion of the story. It was just the end of the investigation site.
Right.
Now we're left analyzing the debris of documentation and testimony, which has really settled into three dominant interpretations, each one trying to impose some kind of order on the Carolina Street anomaly.
Let's break those down. Let's analyze them thoroughly, linking them back to the evidence we've covered. We can start with the most extreme, but also the one that's heavily supported by that institutional paper trail.
Genuine spiritual infestation.
This view holds that the case is supported by the escalating nature of the phenomena, the physical actions witnessed, the strong reactions to prayer, and crucially, the volume of independent witness testimony.
The fact that law enforcement, medical staff, and clergy all confirmed encountering inexplicable coordinated events, it reinforces the idea that the cause was external and spiritual.
The argument is, if three separate professional systems, secular law, medical science, and organized religion all report phenomena they cannot explain away, the likelihood of a powerful external influence becomes significant.
And proponents of this view, they point directly to the rapid, almost complete disappearance of the children's symptoms once they left the structure.
As proof that the influence was localized to the home, and the repeated identification of the basement as a portal or nexus by the clergy also supports the idea that the structure itself was compromised, hosting an intentionally malevolent influence, far beyond a common ghost.
Okay. Conversely, the second major interpretation is the psychological-sociological crisis.
This approach argues that the events were real human experiences, but the interpretation was flawed, rooted in confirmation bias and religious anxiety.
So in this framework, the Ammons family was under immense strain, profound financial instability, the stress of living in a failing city like Gary.
And the fear generated by those initial unexplained phenomena like the flies and the footsteps. This extreme stress, combined with the power of suggestion, especially in a family with deep religious belief, created the terrifying results.
And the medical community's failure to diagnose a simple condition doesn't mean a spiritual one took over.
It just means their crisis was atypical and complex.
So in this view, the children's erratic actions and the physical marks were manifestations of severe psychological trauma or conversion disorder amplified by the environment.
The argument is that once the idea of a haunting took hold, every noise became a malicious footstep, every headache a curse. The children, being highly susceptible to suggestion, would then exhibit behavior that was extreme, but psychologically driven, not spiritually caused.
They were suffering from the fear, not from an entity.
Exactly. And finally, the third interpretation, the systemic failure and media hysteria view, takes the broadest critical stance. This argues that a family in extreme distress was failed not by a demon, but by a fractured system.
How exactly did the system fail them?
The institutions responded in silos without communication. Police documented anomalies without context or psychological training. Doctors noted them as unknown without providing sufficient psychological intervention for trauma.
Social services struggled to balance caution with appropriate long-term care.
Right. And the sources indicate that because no single system could provide a unifying, responsible explanation, the resulting narrative was driven by the media, who just sensationalized the ambiguity.
The media reinforced the family's fear, magnified the spectacle, and turned a cry for help into a horror show.
And the critical point of this interpretation is that the story grew because of this lack of institutional integrity and containment, the monetization of fear and the pursuit of dramatic headlines. It all eclipsed the truth of the family's suffering and made objective research nearly impossible.
But what brings us back to the center of the debate, regardless of which interpretation you lean toward, is the power of the documentation.
It is. This case is unique precisely because it is supported by such a robust paper trail involving government and medical agencies, hospital notes, CPS reports, official police logs. These documents establish that multiple institutions confirmed encountering events they could not explain, regardless of the cause.
And that distinction is what makes the Carolina Street House stand apart from typical folklore and ghost stories. It wasn't just a rumor circulating among neighbors.
No, it involved formal, legally binding agencies that had to record something in their logs.
And the reluctance of many of those professional witnesses to discuss the case later on, many of them distancing themselves entirely, refusing interviews, it suggests that something occurred that challenged their fundamental professional assumptions about how the world works.
They risked their credibility to document the phenomena, and then they retreated from the subsequent media firestorm. That retreat is a kind of silent testimony to the severity of what they experienced.
So the conclusion of the case is just, inherently unsettled. The house is gone, the physical structure, the alleged nexus is reduced to rubble, yet the controversy persists.
And the Ammons family maintains what happened was terrifyingly real, a spiritual attack.
The legacy isn't in the rubble. It's in the documents and the enduring debate they fuel. The unsettling nature of the unanswered question remains. What truly took hold inside the Carolina Street home?
If the answer lies in the depths of psychology, it exposes profound gaps in how we support vulnerable families under societal stress. If the answer lies outside, in a spiritual domain, it fundamentally challenges modern assumptions about reality and an institutional competency.
The case demonstrates the limits of institutional explanation when confronted with events that just defy the expected structure of reality. This story is kept alive by the very documented anomalies that defy any kind of closure. We can't let the story go precisely because the answer is so elegantly suspended between absolute belief and necessary skepticism.
So we leave you with this provocative thought. Since the physical evidence was erased with the demolition, what remains? Does the persistent memory and the unresolved question exert a form of lingering influence all its own, simply because we cannot let the story go?
We leave you to consider, in the absence of a structure, how much power does a reputation hold? Thank you for joining us for this extensive exploration into a small house and its massive unresolved mystery. We will continue exploring the documented edges of reality in our next discussion.